Welcome. My name is Laura Perry. Some of you may know me as Ariadne. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm here today to talk to you about modern Minoan paganism. I have some housekeeping stuff to start with. This talk is being recorded. If you have questions to ask at the end and you don't want any of that on the recording, I will be happy to talk with you after. That's not a problem. Please hold your questions to the end. I'm going to try not to babble on too long and leave a little room for Q&A. And if not, I'm doing a book signing immediately after this downstairs at Asheville, Raven, and Crown, and so you can just come ask me stuff there. I may be mentioning by name people who have died in case that's an issue for anyone based on your cultural traditions. And also, for the nice people who have asked me about the spots all over my arm, I do not have a tropical disease. I had an encounter with poison ivy while doing yard work this week in the poison ivy one. This is the South. Okay. So, first to be clear, since a lot of people have preconceived notions about Minoan traditions in paganism, I'm going to read to you what we have come up with as our description of modern Minoan paganism as a tradition. Modern Minoan paganism is an independent tradition, separate from any other Minoan group or tradition. We are a welcoming path, happily open to people of any race, ethnicity, gender or gender identity, sexual orientation, age, ability level, disability, geographic location, language, education, or socioeconomic status. We're all in this together. Okay, so, assuming the techno gods are with us, this is our logo, modern Minoan paganism. The center of the logo is, you probably can't see it on here. This is a pendant that was found in a Minoan tomb in the city of Malia on Crete. It's a pair of bees around a honeycomb with 3 drops below it, and we chose that as our logo, and I'll give you the explanation for that later on. But that's us. Dim them just a little, maybe? Yeah, this is not.
Yeah, let's turn them off.
So I'm not actually doing a presentation with the things up here. This is just for you all to look at. It's pretty pictures, and let's see if I can make it work right. So it's going to be a series of Minoan art and artifacts. So it's frescoes and things that have been found at the Minoan temples and in the Minoan cities. And I've got it set to go kind of slow so you can actually really look at the stuff. And while that runs, I'm going to talk. So we're going to start with who were the Minoans. They were a Bronze Age culture on the island of Crete. It sits on a short distance south of the south coast of Greece in the Mediterranean. It's a pretty big island. It's about 150 miles long. And it's the Minoans, their ancestors came down to Crete from western Anatolia during the Neolithic, during the Stone Age when farming first began. The people in western Anatolia, which is Turkey today, migrated down as one of the waves of the Neolithic farming peoples who came into Europe at that time. And they ended up on Crete. These people were a part of what Maria Gimbutas called Old Europe. These are Paleo-Europeans. These were the people who were there before the Indo-Europeans came in. Okay, so this is the earliest, one of the earliest layers of population in Europe. They were not Greek. The Greeks are Indo-Europeans. They came in later. DNA testing shows us that not only did the Minoans come down in one of those waves of Neolithic expansion, but they had brown skin and dark eyes. Okay? So, as did most of the people in Europe at that time, 10,000 BC, 8,000 BC. If you've seen pictures of Cheddar Man online, the reconstructed Neolithic era man from Britain, the Minoans look rather like that. Okay, so from a modern perspective, the earliest Europeans were people of color. Okay, so the Mediterranean is this big oval sea that's kind of protected. It's not rough like the Atlantic. And from very early on, the Minoans built boats and sailed and traded all around. There's evidence that they started trading as early as like 5,000 BC. All around the Mediterranean, the islands, the eastern coast, which is called the Levant, that's like where Israel and Palestine, that area is today. Let's see, what are some other important things? So Crete back then was not a utopia. I like to make this disclaimer, all right? Because I love the idea of a golden age, right? That we can look back to and say, wow, they did it right. They could teach us how to do it right again. So the Minoans did a lot of stuff right. The evidence suggests that they were what we call a sharing economy. That people brought donations of grain, wine, oil, livestock, all kinds of goods to the temples. And the temples stored the surplus. There are actually special places in each temple complex in all the major cities where they stored all this surplus. And it appears to have been distributed to the people through public feasts, through just general distribution, not just during times of famine, but just as a way to make sure that everybody could survive okay. So that's something they did that we can look at and go, okay, that's a good thing. Maybe we should use that as an example. There's a big question mark as to whether or not they had slaves. Every other Bronze Age culture in the region did. We can't tell from what we know about them so far whether they did or didn't. So people like to argue about that. We don't know. I would like to think they didn't, but that would have been really unusual, and I would think that someone somewhere along the line would have commented on it. I don't know. They were not a classless society, at least not during the height of what we consider Minoan culture, with all the temples and the frescoes, and they were a very wealthy society. They were traders. They imported raw materials and exported bronze, saffron, dyed wool. They were the first people that we're aware of who used the Phoenician purple dye made from the murex sea snails. So they were wealthy, and at least in the last few centuries, there was socioeconomic class. There were poor people and rich people. So they weren't perfect, but there are a lot of things about their culture that we can look at and say, maybe we could learn something from that. Okay. Oh, and they were diverse. They were what we might consider a cosmopolitan culture. They were traders, right? They traded with Egypt, which was across the Mediterranean to the south. They traded with mainland Greece. They traded with all the islands. And it looks like a lot of those traders eventually ended up settling in. That's groovy. We're right.
We're just making sure the other door was shut.
Oh, it's coming through the walls.
Yes.
So it looks like the Minoans actually there would be like a Minoan quarter in the main areas where foreign traders lived and worked out of in the Minoan cities, right? So they were a cosmopolitan culture. There, I don't know if I have it on the slideshow, but there is a fresco from Knossos, which is the biggest of the Minoan cities, that shows a Minoan man, and I'll get to the reasons in a minute, but Minoan men are always depicted in this sort of rust color, and then a man whose skin is actually black. And so that suggests that they had people coming up from southern Egypt, from the Nubian area, as part of their population too. So they were diverse and cosmopolitan. They were not destroyed by the eruption of the volcano on the island of Thera, modern Santorini, but they were beaten down pretty well. So that happened about 1625 BCE, and they rebuilt, and they kept going for a couple centuries, but those last couple centuries were a struggle. And the Mycenaeans were Greeks, they were Indo-Europeans, appear to have not just helped them rebuild, but also kind of taken the opportunity to take over at that point. So the last century or so is what we call the Mycenaean occupation, and they were occupiers and colonizers in the same way that we think of that in the modern world. So Minoan religion. This is a libation pitcher.
Wow.
You fill it from the top and the back, and the liquid pours out the mouth. That's one of the things they did a lot of. Is really pretty gorgeous. So what we have learned about Minoan religion comes mostly from archaeology. We can't read what they wrote. We can read what the Mycenaeans wrote around the same time period, but we still haven't deciphered the Minoan script because there's not enough of it. There's a basic mathematical rule. You have to have a certain amount of text before you can decipher any code, whether that's a secret code or a language. There's not enough yet. I'm crossing my fingers that one day some very lucky archaeologist finds another stash of Linear A tablets and we get to read what the Minoans wrote. So they were a temple-based culture. Like you've probably heard about from Mesopotamia and Egypt, their cities had big temple complexes in the middle. And the temples were administrative and governing centers as well as religious centers. Not only was there no separation of church and state the way we think of it, there was no separation of the sacred and the mundane. To people in the Bronze Age, everything is sacred, everything is numinous, everything is infused with the divine. And so you can't look at it and go, well, the temple is where they did their religion, because they did their religion everywhere. Ordinary Minoans, in their homes, we have found altars and shrines just like modern pagans have. Okay, so the regular people, this is what they did. And they would have gone to the temples for big public mystery plays. And a mystery play is an enaction of a sacred myth or story. And there were big plazas along the west side of every temple complex where they would have done this. It would have been pretty spectacular considering how wealthy they were. I expect they had some pretty serious shows. So that's the formal stuff in the cities, but Crete has a lot of countryside and mountains, and nature was also a big part of Minoan religion. So there were cave shrines. They're still there today. You can visit them, that have been sacred since the Neolithic. There were peak sanctuaries on the top of the mountains, and people made pilgrimages to these. They did a lot of the same kinds of things that we do as modern pagans in a variety of traditions. okay? And there are a lot of archaeologists who kind of hem and haw, and they say, I can't imagine that they could possibly have done this thing for real. I mean, what kind of crazy person goes flinging themselves over the back of a bull? They're all gonna die. I grew up on a farm, and I can tell you that cattle, if they're used to being handled from the time they're very young, are eminently trainable. They're like giant dogs that move. I kid you not. They're very trainable. The bulls that you see bursting through walls in the movies are trained. They're frequently doing it for a treat from their trainer. So we think what they did was train the bulls and then do something that amounts to what we would think of in modern times as like a circus act, doing somersaults over the bulls. It still would have been very dangerous, obviously, but it could certainly be done. And our current theory is that they probably did this as part of Dionysus's funeral games, because the god dies every year at the Great Harvest. And funeral games were a major component of a number of Bronze Age cultures' religious traditions. So it was not just showing off, it would have been a sacred activity. So that's the ancient Minoans. Modern Minoan paganism. So I'm going to do a certain amount of negative definitions here, like what we're not. So in addition to not being exclusive, there are a number of very reputable and established Minoan traditions that are exclusive to either gay men or lesbians. So we're not exclusive, we are a welcoming tradition. If you connect with the Minoan gods and goddesses, then you're in. That's it. We're not a dogmatic tradition. We're not the thought police. And this is true of a lot of pagan paths. It's not about how you view the gods and the divine, it's about what you do. So you can be a hard polytheist. You can be a Jungian and view the gods as psychological archetypal constructs that we interact with in our own minds. That kind of doesn't matter. What matters is doing the practices that we do. So let's see. We are also not a Reconstructionist tradition. I've had a few conversations, really great conversations with Reconstructionists. The Egyptian, the Kemetic polytheists, the people who follow a Roman or a Greek path or Norse, all of those traditions have texts of some sort, sacred texts that they can read that tell them how those ancient people did their religion. We don't have that for the Minoans because we still can't read what they wrote on a couple hundred little clay tablets. We can't read it yet. So we don't know. We have archaeology and a fair amount of other stuff, like we have a dance ethnographer who specializes in Mediterranean stuff, who has helped us put together a lot of bits and pieces. And the thing that makes us especially not a Reconstructionist tradition is that we rely pretty heavily on shared gnosis. So in other words, if something occurs to someone, their own personal inspiration, they will put it out there and we'll see if other people had the same experience or the same idea. And if enough people agree with it, then we add it into our practice. That's just kind of how that works. Some of the Norse people have used shared gnosis to reconstruct or to construct a very functional version of Sather, the oracular process that works nicely in the modern world. They're not exactly sure that's how they did it back then, but it works. So that's kind of what we're doing with modern Minoan paganism. If it works, we're not going to say that's how the Minoans did it, but it works for us as modern pagans connecting with these deities in the 21st century. Let's see. We are home-based and based in small groups of people. We just had our very first official public festival, a tiny little one in the Seattle area last Saturday. A bunch of people got together in Puget Sound in one of the public parks, and they did a ritual. And they had a little feast, and so to a certain extent, what we do looks like every other pagan tradition these days, which is people get together and they do a ritual and they share food, and we keep altars at home. We make offerings. We walk labyrinths. That's a big one. So if you can find a labyrinth, that's a thing to do. If we don't have access to a big labyrinth, we do finger labyrinths, which is a very nifty thing. And I think there's a workshop going on this weekend that someone's doing that I'm hoping to attend. Because we're not based in Wicca, the structure of our rituals and our practice doesn't look like that. The Minoans lived obviously thousands of years before Wicca began. What they did, we don't know for sure what they did in their home altars. We're pretty sure what they did in the temples, which would be, a temple is a permanent sacred space. Okay, it's always sacred. So you don't have to create sacred space, it's already there. They might very well have done wardings, but beyond that, it's already sacred. They cleansed and purified their sacred spaces with both incense and herb water. They used herb water to sprinkle, to asperge and cleanse areas, and we have pictures of the aspergillum type devices that they used to do that. So when we do modern ritual, we usually start that way. We have everyone gather, and we do this like at home. If you're doing a meditation or something at your altar, you can light some incense, and I like to avoid the word smudge because the Native American people have said that's kind of theirs, and there's actually a ritual that goes with that. So we call it a smoke bath because that's what the modern Mediterranean trance traditions call it, from the same region. So the smoke bath and a water bath. So you could use herb water or rose water, orange flower water, anything like that. Herb tea, mint tea works nicely. They're nothing if not practical. Because this is not an orthodox religion, it doesn't matter what you believe exactly, just that in some fashion you are connecting with the deities. The main purpose of modern Minoan paganism is to connect with those gods and goddesses in whatever way makes sense to you, in whatever way touches and moves you and adds value to your life. We do deity invocations, just like most other traditions do. We do trance possession. We're pretty sure that's something that the Minoans did. There's Minoan art. There are some seal rings that show what appears to be trance possession with an image of a small deity coming down into priestess or priest. The Minoans probably used opium dissolved in wine to help out with that process. We don't recommend that. Or at least we can't officially condone it. But yeah, trance ritual of various sorts, dancing, drumming, bells. So in any of that kind of practice. And so let's, how are we doing? Oh look, I haven't talked too much yet, okay. So, the gods and goddesses that I keep talking about. say, oh yeah, I like that goddess, as if the pantheon consists of a single deity. And usually they think of that as the snake goddess, right? The one with her arms up holding a snake in each hand. There's more than that. We begin with a reverence for the three realms of land, sea, and sky. So this is something that we have developed as we have called on the deities and done ritual with them and practiced and worked with them. We have a number of druids who have felt very connected with the Minoan deities, and they find a lot of familiar concepts. And apparently, I'm not a druid, I'm not that familiar with the tradition, but apparently the three realms of land, sea, and sky is big in druidry, so that's something that we have in common. Oh yes, the warning, okay. All these deities have names that are either Greek, because those are the only people who remember them, or pre-Greek. Everybody says them differently because that's not most of our native language. When I'm just talking about them, I use a standard modern American pronunciation. When many of us are doing ritual and calling on them, we use what scholars have given us as probably the most standard ancient Greek pronunciation. And those are different in most cases. So I'll give you both if you want, if you're not too scared. Some of them are interesting. All right. So, end of slideshow. You want to look at it again?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so Minoan deities do not fit neatly into a human-style family tree. Okay? A lot of people are used to seeing like the Greek and the Norse pantheons, and you can literally draw a family tree. This one is this one's offspring or mate, or okay. That doesn't work with the Minoan deities. Many of them appear to be either twins or reflections of each other. If any of you have read Vicki Noble's book, The Double Goddess, the double goddess from Neolithic times appears to have continued on down through the Minoans. So we have some that are twins or mother-daughter pairs, but you can't really force fit them neatly into a family tree. And so we just kind of try not to squint at that too closely. So let's start at the top, literally. So the uppermost deity, her name is Ariadne. The Greeks remembered her just well enough to decide that she wasn't the great cosmic mother of all anymore, but just one of their muses, the muse of astronomy. So she is the goddess of the cosmos and the underworld. Ourania. And interestingly, Nano Marinatos, who is one of the most famous modern archaeologists who has done some of the more mystical stuff with Minoan archaeology, Nano is a nickname. Her name is actually Ariadne. So, yeah. Okay, so she's, above all, some of us experience her almost like the quantum foam, like she is the ground of being. She is the fabric of the universe itself. One of the things that has happened as we have built this tradition, and this is very much a consensual thing. I call myself the facilitator. We've got about 1,300 members in the online group right now, and we do it all by consensus. What does everyone think of this? How does this look to you? How have you experienced this? And so we end up with generally a whole pile of epithets for each deity, just like you get in Greek and Roman and Egyptian tradition. So Ariadne is starry mother, grandmother universe, great cosmic mother of all, mother of darkness and stars. are the mother goddesses of the three realms. You're probably already familiar with the goddess Rhea. She, along with a number of other Minoan deities, kind of got borrowed into the Greek pantheon. And so Rhea, whose name is actually pre-Greek, it doesn't have a Greek etymology, so we think that's probably actually what the Minoans called her. And a standard ancient Greek pronunciation for that name would be Rhea, like the H in there. So she is Mother Earth, right? She is the Earth Mother Goddess. She is the land. She is most likely how the Minoans thought of their island. They probably thought of the island itself as her body. One of her names is also, it's spelled Ida. The Greek pronunciation would be Ida. And there's still a mountain named after her on Crete. Mount Ida is the way most people say that, but that's a sacred mountain that's got a cave shrine on it and a peak sanctuary that date back to Minoan times. So that's land. Sea is the goddess Poseidaya. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again?
Poseidaya, Posidaeja is how that's usually spelled. So her name is actually attested on the Linear B tablets, the one that the Mycenaeans wrote down, the early Greeks. Okay, so we think that they kind of borrowed that name and gender swapped it to create their sea god. Because the Greeks were not originally a seafaring people, they became a seafaring people over time, later on. And so they would have added that kind of a deity to the pantheon. So Poseidaya is Grandmother Ocean, Lady of the Waters, and over time, working with her, we have discovered that she is the lady of all the waters, freshwater as well as saltwater. And if you think about it from a modern scientific perspective, that makes sense because the water cycle is all one water, right? It all recycles through the oceans, through the rivers, the lakes, the rain, all of it. So, and sky. For the sky, we have a deity named Tarasia. That's Therasia. And she is a sun goddess, sun and fire goddess. We think that the island of Thera, modern Santorini, was sacred to her. A lot of her symbology comes up on the frescoes that were found in the town of Akrotiri, which was the major city on the island before it blew itself to smithereens. So she was a sun goddess. There were quite a few sun goddesses around the Eastern Mediterranean in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. You get sun gods with the Indo-Europeans coming in. They had a different perspective on how deity works, but you get sun goddesses in the Mediterranean early on. The way that works in that worldview is the sun is a fire in the sky, right? And she's the fire mother. So we have the earth mother, the fire mother, and the water mother. And the fire mother goes across the sky during the day and she goes through the underworld at night, right? Okay. And when she's in the underworld, she heats things up there. So if you have a volcano, she has done that. If you have hot springs, she has done that as she travels through the underworld. And the island of Thera, modern Santorini, it is a volcano. It's a supervolcanic caldera. And it still has hot springs on it today. And so, yeah, so land, sea, and sky, that's the three mothers. And we consider them to be sort of the foundation of our pantheon. We typically, I have land, sea, it's a seashell, I don't know if you can see that. sky here, this is, these are little palm fronds. The date palm is sacred to all the Eastern Mediterranean sun goddesses. So we typically, date palm, yes. Moving on down through the list, which is more extensive than you might have thought. Oh, and I gotta talk faster. Okay. Ariadne, most people have heard of Ariadne. Lady of the Labyrinth. She is actually addressed as that on one of the linear B tablets, so we know for sure that she was called that. The labyrinth is both there are not actually any physical labyrinths on Minoan Crete. Okay, we don't actually get the labyrinth design until well after the Bronze Age collapsed, well into classical times. We think that it was probably too sacred to be created in any kind of permanent way, and that it was maybe drawn on the ground for rituals in something temporary like flour, or I guess if maybe they were incredibly rich, they could use saffron. But it would not have been a permanent thing. A lot of us, a shocking number really, have had dreams and visions of a room in a temple somewhere that have snakes all over the floor, and then the snakes resolve themselves into a labyrinth that then has to be walked. And that's, every time somebody mentions that, someone else says, oh my God, I had that dream. So that seems to be the symbology goes together there. A lot of people view the snake goddess as an aspect of Ariadne. Our latest thought is that maybe Ariadne, who is considered to be a daughter of the three mothers, maybe Ariadne and the mothers and Urania all have serpent aspects in their underworld, as their underworld aspect. But that's one of those your mileage may vary thing. Not everybody experiences it that way. Okay. And the snake goddess is definitely iconic of Minoan civilization. I mean, that's the first thing people think of is those figurines. And we don't actually know whether those figurines are meant to represent the goddess or a priestess embodying her. The general consensus at this point, both of archaeologists and of mystical people, is that the Minoans probably did not directly represent deity. We think they only represented their clergy being possessed by the deity. Because every image we have is fully human and is wearing what is pretty much standard priestly garb from Minoan times. So that's, we think that for whatever reason, maybe because it's ineffable, maybe because it's something that's too powerful that maybe humans shouldn't put it down in permanent form. But anyway, okay, Dionysus. Dionysus is the earliest known instance of a divine child being born to a mother with no father in a sacred cave at midwinter surrounded by animals. So, it's a common motif, actually, more common than you'd think. But that's the earliest that we're aware of. There might be earlier ones, I don't know. But anyway, Dionysus was born in Rhea's sacred cave at midwinter. And there are currently 2 sacred caves that still exist on Crete, each one of which claims to be the one. And I think there were probably more than that in ancient times. I'm sure there were people who were like, nah, I'm not going to that one. I'm going on a pilgrimage to that one because that's the real one. But yeah, and Dionysus is an ecstatic divine god. We think he may actually have originally been a mushroom god, dating back back to the Neolithic, maybe even the Paleolithic. It's kind of hard to tell because obviously those people didn't write books. And he continued on. There's the Minoan Dionysus. One of his aspects is called Zagrus, Zagreus. There are a lot of different arguments as to what the name means, but essentially that's his shamanic form, right? He is torn to pieces during the grape harvest. He descends to the underworld. He's a psychopomp. Because he has access to the underworld, he is a shamanic god and can heal. And later on, the Greeks took the Minoan Dionysus and combined him with a similar ecstatic god from Phrygia. And that's how you get the classical Dionysus with the Maenads and the Thyrsus and all of that. It's actually a syncretism of two and maybe more than two gods. So that, yeah. Oh gosh, it's quarter till. All right. So quickly through the list. Arachne, or Ananke, that's the fate goddess. Some people view her as an aspect of Ariadne. Some people view her as her own thing. The Melissae, ancestral bee goddess spirits. Honey, M-E-L, it's like the modern woman's name Melissa and then add an E on the end. Honey was very important to the Minoans. Their reputation as beekeepers actually survived for centuries after all Minoan cities were destroyed. Aletheia, who is also was also borrowed into the Greek pantheon. She is a midwife goddess. Some of our folks connect her with Hecate. The horned ones, we have pairs of horned deities. Everyone knows the Minotaur, right? He wasn't a monster, he was a god. He was a Minoan god. Horned animals were extremely important to the Minoans. They had cattle, goats, sheep. Their sheep were all horned varieties. And we think they did this not just because they were good livestock, but for symbolic reasons. So we have the horned ones in male-female pairs. So we have the Minotaur and Europa. We have, it's like the word Europe, only with an A on the end instead of an E. We have the goat god, whose name we don't know. The Victorian authors gave us Minocapros, which is a mouthful, but that's what they called him, so that's what we call him. And his female counterpart is Amalthea, the goat goddess who suckled Dionysus in the cave when he was born, and from whom we get the cornucopia, which is one of the bottomless vessel type things that never empties, is always full of abundance. And then we have a deer horned pair. Again, we don't know the name. I find it interesting that the male horned ones, their names disappeared except for the Minotaur. So we call him by the name that the Victorian writers came up for him, which is Mini-Lathos. And his counterpart, his female counterpart, we know her name. She's Britomartis. She's also sometimes called Dictina, which relates her back to one of Rhea's sacred mountains on Crete. And there is a cave on Crete. I don't know if you can visit it, but it's still there, that was sacred to her in Minoan times. And Daedalus, who built Ariadne's dancing floor and who is credited with building the labyrinth. We view him as a smith and inventor god. And then Minos, after whom Sir Arthur Evans named the Minoan society. We don't know what they call themselves. We call them Minoans because he said, oh yeah, that's where King Minos lived, right? So these were his people. And so he called them Minoans. He was a god. He was apparently a triple god. There's Minos, Sarpedon, and Rhadamanthus. We don't know a whole lot about the others, but Minos appears to have been an underworld judge of the dead, possibly a moon god, we're not sure. He's one that's still kind of murky for a lot of us, even though we've in ritual. We do have a sacred calendar. It doesn't look like the modern Neo-pagan wheel of the year. It's not eightfold, but it does have the equinoxes and the solstices. The Minoan temples and cave shrines and peak sanctuaries all have astronomical alignments. Some of them are pretty amazing. They have alignments to solstice and equinox sunrises and sunsets. There are alignments to the major and minor lunar standstills. There are alignments to the heliacal risings of Sirius, Aldebaran, Spica, and Arcturus. And we're pretty sure that they used the heliacal rising of the Pleiades, which happened around the beginning of May back then, as the beginning of their sailing season. So we do the solstices and the equinoxes. We do the Feast of Grapes at the grape harvest, which would have happened whenever the grapes were ripe. We've kind of stuck it on the calendar at August 31st. But that's the grape harvest. Dionysus' self-sacrifice. It's pretty much your typical harvest type festival. What else have we got? The mysteries, either the precursor to the Eleusinian mysteries or a variant of them appears to have existed in Minoan Crete. And so we've kind of run with that. There's a cave dedicated to the midwife goddess Aletheia on Crete that we think may have been where they did the mysteries in Minoan times, or at least one of the places. And then we also have, we've used dance ethnography, Mediterranean dance ethnography, and modern Mediterranean religious festivals that are survivals from earlier times as inspiration for the blessing of the waters in January. This is dedicated to Poseidon, grandmother ocean, but she's also the lady of all the waters. And so this is a blessing of the waters and thanking the waters for being the basis of life. And then we also have a blessing of the ships, which is not something that everybody does, because obviously we don't all have ships. Yes, but we did decide that it would be helpful at the beginning of a journey. We think the Minoans had some kind of ship blessing at the beginning of every sailing season, right? And so that would have happened at the heliacal rising of the Pleiades around the beginning of May. And it might have been simple, it might have been very fancy with processions. There are frescoes from Akrotiri that show what looks like a sacred ship procession of some sort. So we think they might have done something pretty fancy, at least sometimes. And so, yeah, it's cars, airplanes. Okay, so we're running up toward noon here. Questions? Yeah.
Real quick, the Greeks called the Minotaur Asterion.
Yes.
Do the Minoans as well? Modern Minoans?
Some of us do. There are, I can't think of the title, I have a blog post about that lists, there are 4 or 5 different classical authors who identified Asterion as 4 or 5 different characters from myth, okay? And it's a little murky. Yes, a lot of us identify the Minotaur by the name Asterion and associate him with the constellation Taurus, which actually appears to have been a constellation going all the way back to the Paleolithic. There's a painting of what is very clearly constellation Taurus with the Hyades and the Pleiades on the Lascaux Cave, which dates to Paleolithic. So, but yes, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm
entire pantheon through a particular lens. Okay, we think there was a single temple complex at the center of each of the major cities, and only one. There may have been smaller shrines in various places throughout the city, but there was only a single temple. We think each of the temples had as its focus a particular deity that may originally have been one of the Great Mothers, we're not sure. But they do appear to have served the whole pantheon, just with each city kind of specializing in its own. The priesthood, obviously we don't have written records, so a lot of this has to be inferred from the archaeology. As far as we can tell, there were no actual deity images like the Egyptians had. They would have the image in its little shrine box. As far as we were aware, they did not have actual deity images. They only had symbols, and they had, leave that off. They had images of worshipers and the priesthood. We have lots and lots of figurines of worshipers and priests and priestesses in various postures. We think they were probably ecstatic postures used to induce various trance states or connect with particular deities. The temples had both practical and specifically sacred areas. So they had kitchens. People lived there. There were full-time priesthood who had residences in the temples. We think there were also part-time priesthood, men and women who came in for particular things from the cities. There were workshops in the temples. We don't know for certain whether those artisans were also dedicated priesthood or whether they were just artisans who got lucky enough to work at the temple, because it appears that the goods that were made in the temples were considered to be of special value compared to those that were made elsewhere. There are shrine rooms and altars all over all the temples that appear to have been tended extensively on a daily basis. And so there would have been, there are things like sacred horns, only not this tiny. This is my travel altar. So there were sacred horns. There were figurines like the snake goddess. There were seashells, loads of seashells everywhere. And lots of other little pieces like that. And the shrine shelves would be filled with them, just absolutely filled. And then offerings, offering stands. If you've ever seen a footed cake plate, that's what a lot of their offering stands look like. And the idea behind that is it's the same as elevating the offering. When you're making an offering, it puts it above the level of the ordinary. Okay, and so they had these offering stands. They appear to have made offerings of bread, fruit, flowers, incense, slaughtered animals, obviously as food, libations, wine, water, honey, milk of all kinds, possibly with herbs in it. That appears to have been a thing. Poppy seeds, sesame seeds, coriander seeds. So and this went on pretty much constantly, and people brought donations to the temples, both to help support the temple and for specific rituals to be done. Like, you could bring a bunch of stuff to the temple and say, can you do a ritual? My grandmother just died, please make sure her soul makes it safely to the underworld, that kind of thing. And so yeah, there was loads of administration. All of the clay tablets that we have are all accounting. Okay? So literally it's like this person donated 5 cows and a jar of honey to this deity.
Yeah, I know we have a statuary. Is there any evidence, or do we have any speculation on snake handling being as part of religious practice, or?
We're not sure. There's really no evidence. There's really no hard evidence. The soft evidence so to speak, is that there is still what you might call a house snake cult in rural Crete, that having, not actually snake handling in the modern sense, but having a snake, right, and making it your house snake, literally, so making sure that there's a snake around and to bless your home and obviously to keep the rodent population down. We think they may have done that in the temples as well. They may have built their temples and their homes in such a way that snakes could get in and out easily. There are no venomous snakes on Crete, so there would be no danger.
Would there be any kind of, you mentioned snakes maybe in the temples, would there have been any connection to the Asclepius? Because there were snakes in their temples.
That's possible. There is some contention that there was a Minoan deity similar to Asclepius. That's still very nebulous, and none of us have really been able to connect with a deity like that in our practice, but that might partly be due to us, because like when we were trying to figure out the three mothers and the serpent goddess and stuff like that, frequently we would get answers back in our meditations like, I'm not talking to you until you can figure out my real name. So, or you know, essentially, look, if you're going to be groping around in the dark like this, then you know, you're obviously not to the point yet that I can really help you. So, yeah, but yes, we do have kind of that idea. We haven't gotten that far yet in terms of actually working it out in details. So it is actually noon, and I'm sure somebody else wants to use this room. Yes?
And people who are interested in where you are, what are the best, other than like the Facebook group?
Okay.
What other resources would you use?
So I wrote a book, and I'm about to carry a whole box of them downstairs to do a signing.
What time is your signing
Now.
Oh,
I am literally going to pick all this stuff up, and my darling husband and offspring are going to help me carry them downstairs. The Facebook group is your best resource in our free. And hang on, let me officially end this, okay? So this is a benediction that Emily Dickinson wrote, because she didn't like the one they used in church. And it fits very nicely with the symbology we use in modern Minoan paganism. In the name of the bee, and of the butterfly, and of the breeze. Amen.